I hope you're having a good day. Today I'm interviewing Alvin Glatowski, a hero in my view, who in 1970 hijacked a boat full of napalm bound for Vietnam and changed its course to Thailand. It was his great achievement that he did this and nobody got hurt. And he managed to take the boat to Thailand. And it's a wonderful story. And it is such a pleasure to be talking to Al about this, to hear his side of his part of not just the story, but everything that happened around that story as well. So, Al, you're such an inspiration to us all. It's very hard to imagine anybody doing what you did today. And really, I think your time on the Columbia Eagle, which was the boat that was used, bears repeating as many times as you can tell the story. So I'll hand it over to you because I think the perspective that you have, your anti-war perspective, your driving force that caused you to put your life and your future in danger bears explanation so that we can all understand, learn from what you did and hopefully embolden others. So Al, tell us, how did this all start?
Well, first of all, I should clarify one thing. It's not a boat, it was a ship.
Yes, it was.
Secondly, we didn't go to Thailand. The ship was destined to go to Thailand, and it was carrying munitions of napalm bombs. I don't remember how many tons, but it was tons of napalm bombs, and they were to be used in Thailand from the American air bases to be used in Laos and Cambodia, and both of those countries were neutral. And that's where the ship was supposed to go. And the bombs were destined to be used along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And also if they could reach that far over to Vietnam as well. So we were to disembark all of the cargo in Sattahip, Thailand. What we did was we were able to meet up, my comrade and I. We had met in the Union Hall and we were discussing during waiting for a ship, to throw in for a job to go to sea. And we were discussing the war. Everyone did back then. And we had a lot of sailors that would go to sea for short journeys along the coast from one port to another and then get off. They were called coastwise sailors. They didn't want to go over to the war, or they didn't want to go to deep water. And but I was a deep water sailor and or seaman. And during that time, we discussed another ship that had disappeared that was full of war material, and that was called the Badger State. And you have to understand, Pippa, that this was during the time of great upheaval in the United States, 1969, 1970. I was in Vietnam. I went to Vietnam in December of 67. I was there and left in 68 in January, carrying war material the first time. And that opened my eyes to what was going on over there. And certainly after hearing veterans come back and talk about what we were doing, it was just too horrific. As a military dependent and growing up in the military, my whole family, we were all sailors or seamen. And growing up on military bases, it was it was just not what the US military does. We don't kill women and children. We don't go and do burn down villages, and we don't, that's not war. That's just not done.
I think at this stage, Al, could you explain just a little bit to people who don't know what napalm is and what it does? Because this is a really important part of the story.
Yes, napalm's been used by the occupation forces in Palestine against the Palestinians. We have seen that used on tent cities. I mean, tent villages. It's terrible. In Vietnam, it was used to defoliate and to wipe out entire villages. If I was at a school with giving a talk to children, and I described napalm. I was there at the same time as, he just died, Daniel Ellsberg. He was doing, the man that heroically leaked the Pentagon Papers. And so we were both at this school giving a talk. And one of the things that I did, we were in different parts of the school giving the talk. We never had an opportunity to meet face to face. But at that school, I explained to the youth that if a bomb with napalm was utilized, it's jellied gasoline. It burns. You can't put it out. It burns. And I described it as such. Napalm will actually burn through the skin into the bone if it continues to burn, if you get a sufficient amount on you. It tumbles. It does not fall like a normal bomb. The detonators are on the end, and when it's released, it tumbles. And as it hits the ground, one of the detonators will eventually touch it, and then it explodes and it shoots the gasoline, the jellied gas, the napalm, forward, and it ruptures your lungs if you're not, even if you don't get it. If you're in the vicinity, the air is superheated, and you're going to drown on the fluids in your lung as they explode, as they liquefy, but if you get it on you, it will burn you and scar you for the rest of your life.
And this was used mostly against civilians.
It was used under the theory that it was an occupied village or an occupied trail by the Viet Cong or the Viet Minh, or the Khmer Rouge, even, if you remember them. But it was used indiscriminately because you can't control where it's going to go. And it's not like the smart bombs that we have where they can guide them into different places. This was a chemical bomb that falls and tumbles, and when you release it, you have an idea where it's going to go, but you don't know where it's going to end up and explode. There's lots of movies where you see the scenes where the planes are dropping something and then they move away really quick, and then you see the flash of the fire. And that's napalm. That's what it does. It was used in flame. It's similar to the product that was in flamethrowers in World War II. And it's just gotten more refined.
So now maybe back to your story. There you were, a seaman on this boat. You'd done some preparation beforehand, I believe, or a lot of thinking type preparation beforehand. So can you take it from there?
Well, let me finish the thing with the napalm. If it's dropped, a lot of schools have nice courtyards. And if it was dropped, it will explode and go over the building as well as blow out the windows, and the flames come in. So that was the best description I could give at the school of how there was no way to hide from it. Um, and you couldn't. It would even it would superheat the air so bad that your lungs would rupture. And going back now to when I did that and explained it, I was really scared that I was going to get called on the carpet for terrorizing children, young people, young adults, and just explaining how it affects people and how it was used and how it worked. It was used in villages to wipe out the villages. A few napalm bombs and that would destroy the village. And even if you were in a cubbyhole, you would have to be down deep in the ground in order to get away from it. So that's an explanation of napalm. And I'm sorry if I went overboard on it, but it's a horrific.
No, there's a whole generation out there who doesn't know.
It's a horrific weapon and
yeah.
mass destruction. It is because it's indiscriminate.
Yeah.
Going to the mutiny, my comrade and I met in the Union Hall. We didn't know each other before that. And we, in the course of discussions that we would have, we would go out, we would stay all morning to see what ships would come in to go to sea. And that was how we made our living. And in the course of our lunches and sitting down and playing cards, that's what all the sailors do, is they play cards or they gossip with each other. First thing you do in the Union newspaper is look at the obituaries and see who died and see if your seniority went up. And so we were discussing this, the war and our beliefs against the war. And that was probably the main thing, is that attracted each of us to each other, to open up more and discuss our beliefs. I considered myself a socialist communist back then, anarchist communist back then. My comrade did as well. And so we discussed politics. And in the course of discussion of the politics, we became closer and closer. And we would openly, privately, but openly with each other, discuss the possibility of seizing a vessel. Could it be done? Could someone actually seize a vessel? And how many people would it take? Would it? You obviously couldn't do it with two. You had to have more. That was our we were convinced of that. So in the course of this, we've met other sailors that also were anti-war, but they were signing up for this ship going off to the war. And that's where Clyde and I sort of drew the line. We didn't want to go back over to Vietnam. Both of us had been there, weren't interested in going back. And during that time, we developed a closeness where we would actually begin to talk about the possibility of doing such a thing. And of course, the very first thing that came up was, well, we can't do it without a weapon. So my comrade had a gun and I was going to try to obtain one, and I wasn't able to obtain one in California at that time. I didn't have the funds. The ship came up on the job board. We went up and threw in for the jobs. I threw in for an engine room job. He was in the engine room. I threw in for an engine room job, not to be close, but just because I had worked in the engine room for so long on ships. The majority of my time was spent in the engine rooms. Someone with a little bit of seniority over me got the job that I threw in for, and there was nothing else available in the engine room. McKay got his oiler job and working in the bowels of the ship. And so I ended up throwing in for, we discussed it, and I told him, I said, well, I think the two of us should go together. And so we have to. That's the primary thing, or we get off of this ship and get onto another one. And but there were a couple of other people that were anti-war that we thought might be allies and help do such a thing. So I threw in for a steward job. I became the officer steward. That was the job that was open, and I had never done it before in my life, and I took the job. Basically, a servant for the officers, and cleaning their rooms and making sure they had clean linens, and if they wanted a meal brought up or whatever, I was the steward and I had to do this. And it was from the captain on down to the third mate or the third engineer. And so we ended up on the ship together. At that time, we were still ashore, so we had shore leave. We could go back over to our homes. And we openly started discussing how and what we could do. And what's interesting is a lot of times things go into a strange direction where you start thinking of like the Wild West. You got these guns and we can do this. Or is there a way to just shoot people? And neither one of us were of that mind, but that was part of the discussion, because you have to, when you're looking at doing something like this, those things come up, and at which point every red flag goes up too. Is this an agent provocateur who's going to put me in jail because I'm talking like this? I mean, you have to think about those things, and you do think about them. It just pops into your head, and we tested each other over and over and over again until we felt confident enough that we could work together. And so we went on the vessel. Vessel left port. We had met with the other anti-war sailors as well, and we didn't openly discuss it, but we sort of vaguely around the issues. And it became very clear that they really weren't as anti-war as we were, but I think it was because of their politics. I think that was the fact that they were not, their politics were not radical. Their politics were very safe. And which is, I can't describe it another way. Their politics were safe. And so as the ship went underway and we were starting to go to Vietnam, actually Thailand, we discussed, McKay and I, and sometimes them, they would come out and we would all talk together about anti-war issues and politics. And as we did this, that's when we became clear that they weren't going to help at all. And McKay and I then came up with some other bizarre scenarios on possibly how to sink the vessel, including setting a bomb, making a bomb and setting it off. And so that was part of one of the things that I was requested to try to do. And then he smuggled the bomb down into the hold and tried. It was an incendiary device. It wasn't a bomb. It was an incendiary device. And
surely though, Al, that would have been something that would have put your own lives in great danger.
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
you were prepared. You were actually prepared to blow yourself up in the cause of anti-war action.
Yes, we realized at that point that without help that it wasn't going to occur, and so we came up with other alternatives, and the goal was to at least with an incendiary device, it would be a cause of fire, and people could. The detonators are not stored with the munition, and so the detonators were in a separate place, and our goal was to set the cargo on fire, the napalm, and um, and then we veered away from that because of the difficulty. McKay had taken one of the things that we had put together down into the hold and tried to set it up, and somebody had seen someone go down and reported it, and they McKay ended up leaving, and an officer went down and discovered that someone had been down there, and McKay come back out, and it went over the side, so that they didn't know who it was. Rumors started spreading, but nobody knew what it was or who it was. Then we had some unusual things that occur. When a ship goes to sea, part of our training is that they do the ship will have a fire drill, and they do the fire drill. It can be announced automatically at any time. It can happen an hour after you go to sea. It can happen a day, 3 days, a week. You don't know. And the captain will require it. And we all go to our fire stations. And we had already undergone one of those, if I remember correctly. And after we had passed Hawaii and we were on our way to the Philippines for bunkers, for fuel, when we got to the Philippines, that's where I figured we would get me a gun. That's where I would obtain my weapon. And we did. We went to a bar and was able to procure a pistol for myself. McKay had his own that he had brought. And now we had 2 guns. And things got a lot more serious at that point. And
so at that point, you had to develop a plan B because the original plan was foiled. And you had to develop a plan B, which possibly was something you'd already thought through to some extent, even before leaving California.
yes, ma'am.
But of course, finding the courage to carry it through is an entirely different matter. You were going to try and do this with minimal casualties, with maximum effect. An incredibly difficult thing to try and achieve. So maybe you can take it from there.
What occurred is we had these bizarre ideas of one of us going over to the detonators where they were stored and shooting into them. And we were prepared to give up our lives for stopping this cargo. Nobody would have known. It would have been people, we would have told the captain that one of us is getting ready to detonate the detonators and you need to abandon ship. And that way the crew could have gotten off, or most of them could have gotten off. And but I think that they wouldn't have believed us. And so anyway, what happened, Pippa, is we had a fire drill after we left Subic Bay or Bataan. And so we had a fire drill. And my fire station was on the flying bridge, which is above the bridge. And coincidentally, it was also the fire station for 2 of the anti-war guys. And I had gone up and just was looking. That gives you almost a 360-degree view of the vessel. And while you cannot see what people are doing, you've got such a good view, and you all of a sudden, when that occurred, it dawned on me that if we could do a fire drill or an abandoned ship, that we would be able to gather we would be, can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you just fine.
Thank you. I just got a message that my sound wasn't working. So what occurred is we were up on the flying bridge, and McKay was at his fire station down in the engine room, and he was on duty. He couldn't leave his workstation, but everybody else went to their fire stations that were not in the engine room or on the bridge. And that's when it dawned on me that there is a way to get the people off of the vessel. And then, so that only us are the remaining ones, and we would still have one lifeboat left that we could put the balance of the crew in with our pistols, and then they could leave. And then McKay and I could sacrifice ourselves to stop the weapons. And that was a real hard decision for both of us. But we were both just adamant that we did not want these bombs to get to where they were going. And we said, so there was a lifeboat left and a second one, a life raft that he and I could actually get to and launch, and maybe we would still survive and then go to jail for the rest of our lives. So there was an option that we possibly could survive, but we were prepared for the worst. And during that time, I came down off the bridge when the fire drill was over. McKay was coming up from the engine room for lunch, and I cornered him and I said, "McKay, come, we have to talk." And so we went to a place where there was a lot of privacy, and I told him point blank, I said, "This is it. I know how to do this. I know how. We're not going to have any help." I said, but the ship can help us. And instead of a fire drill, we make it one where they have. And so so he and I discussed this further, and we came up with a solution that if we could capture the captain and the radio operator and the first mate. The first mate was the most dangerous person for us. He was the one that had discovered that we had attempted something earlier. That someone had attempted something earlier down in the holds. And so we had a list of the people that we wanted to capture. And at 12 noon every day, the radio operator receives a report from the mate on duty that gives us our 12 noon sighting, which is exact location. This was pre-GPS, and it gives us our exact location on the sea, and that is transmitted back to the ship's company, and then also to the government, etc. And so we made the decision that in a couple of days we were going to do this, and it would be immediately after the radio operator sent off our location. And so around 11:45, one couple of days later, we had gathered our weapons and made sure that our bullets were good and that they were loaded. And we proceeded then to go to the captain's office and capture the captain. And so the captain was used to seeing me, but not McKay in his office, because I was the officer's steward. And I went in and I talked with him, engaged him in a conversation. Then I said, oh, wait a second, and opened up the door. McKay came in, and the captain was sitting at his desk, and we told him that we were taking over the ship. We hadn't yet pulled out guns at that point. And but we had the captain sit down in one spot and stay there. We told him to stay. I went next door and knocked on the mate's door. He was in his bunk. And I told him that the captain had asked me to get him and have him come over. So of course he does. He walks in, he's captured. McKay pulls out his pistol and has him captured. And I had yet to pull out my pistol. My pistol was in my belt band and my shirt was hanging over my belt. McKay had his pistol inside of a folder, an attaché case. And so he had opened it and pulled out the gun and was holding the case like so, with the gun resting on the case. And they wanted to know what was going on and why we were doing this. And of course, we explained to them it was a political action, that we were seizing the vessel and we were going to stop these explosives from reaching their destination, no matter what it took, even if it meant taking our lives. And that was about 12:45. And so I was waiting for the noon report to come. And so the officer gave one of the seamen the report, who took it down to the radio operator. I could hear that because I had the door open just slightly. And as soon as I heard the Morse code going out, I knew that it was being sent. A little bit later, the noise stopped. When the sailor brought the report, he gives it to the captain, and he takes it to the radio operator so that both of them have it. So he could see inside, but he couldn't see McKay when he did this. And then he went on over. And then I mentioned to him before, and I opened up the door and said, oh, by the way, the captain asked to speak to Sparks. Sparks is the radio operator, to talk to him as soon as the report is sent. Would you pass that, Ellen, for me, please? And he said, yes. And so it was done. Sparks didn't come right away. And so I ended up walking over and knocking on his door and saying, the captain would like to see you. Can you please come in? He's asked me to ask you to come in. So Sparks went into the office, and now we had 3 officers. And the radio report had gone out. We knew exactly where we were. It was marked on the chart. We knew exactly where we were on the ocean. And then we proceeded to, we told the captain that there was a bomb, that we had a bomb set up by the detonators, and that we were going to set it off, but we wanted to give everybody the opportunity to leave. And so we wanted him to issue the abandoned ship order, which is similar to a fire drill, but not the same. And of course, the signal is the ship's horn. And as soon as that went, the captain, we had the captain go on the phone and called up to the bridge. He didn't want to do it. And just prior to him doing that, the chief mate got up out of his seat, put his arms out. He was a large man. He put his arms out like a football player that was going to tackle someone, and started to walk towards McKay, because I hadn't yet pulled my gun out. And that was McKay's decision. He wanted me to not pull the gun out unless it was necessary. He just wanted them to think there was only one gun. We didn't want them to think there were 2. And but when this mate got up and McKay's hand was shaking really bad with the pistol in it, I encouraged him by pulling my gun out of my belt, popping down on one knee and pointing it at his chest, and said, you got 1 second to get your ass back in that seat, or I'm going to blow your fucking ass through the bulkhead. And that's the way it was. That was the way it was said. That's the way it was. And he admitted his eyes got really big, and he backed off and he set his ass down, and the other officers cooperated. And I took my gun to the captain and I said, "Captain, get on the phone right now and make that call." And so he did. We didn't want to get too far out of the position because we knew there was another vessel behind us and on the same shipping lane. And if we wanted to save people's lives, we needed to get them over the side as quickly as possible into the lifeboats and heading away from the vessel towards the other vessel that was coming behind us. And in fact, that vessel was called the SS Rappahannock. And we were on the Columbia Eagle. They were both World War II vessels that had been reconfigured in order to be used in the war zone. And so victory ships is what they were. And so that occurred. We now had the abandoned ship whistling going on. People fled into their lifeboats. Nobody believed, everybody thought it was another fire drill. And everybody got in their lifeboats. You can sometimes stop the ship dead at sea. We ordered that the ship be stopped, but don't kill the engines. They did that. And so the ship's just sort of gliding along on the last of its power until the prop starts going again. And so they set the lifeboats over the side. Two of the anti-war guys that were up on the flying bridge, they didn't release their life raft, and which would release if the ship started to sink. It would automatically release. And so about 3/4 of the crew went over the side. And at which point the phone was ringing off the hook, and that was the engine room wanting to know what was going on, and the bridge wanting to know what was going on. At which point we took them all up topside to the bridge, and we seized the bridge. Once the bridge was seized, McKay had always spent his time in the engine room working on ships. I had been a seaman on the helm and up in the bridge, and so I was familiar with what was going on. I knew how to look at a radar. I knew how to helm the ship. I knew what courses were. I could look at the chart and see where we wanted to go and what degree we had to be at in order to get us in that direction. And so we had the best of both worlds by accident. It was very fortuitous, and for us and for the crew. So we were able to get most of the crew over the side. We told the mate, who was communicating with the people in the boats, about the vessel that was behind us. He knew it was there anyway, and we passed on the information to the crew that may not have known that, so that they would head in that general direction. And they did. And unbeknownst to us, we wanted a skeleton crew, and we wanted primarily officers. We weren't looking for any non-officers. We were looking for the officers. We figured that, well, it's a class thing, I guess. They were going to go down with us if we went down. The officers, they only had one boat to get off, and that was the life raft. And so we succeeded in capturing the vessel and locating where we were. We ordered the chief mate to go to his forecastle and secure himself inside and not to come out without permission. He was, like I said, the most dangerous person for us. And everybody would follow his orders. And we had explained already to the captain what we were doing. We explained to why we were doing it. We explained it to the radio operator, and we explained it to the chief mate. Then we explained the same thing to the crew that was up in the bridge. And it raised a lot of eyebrows. People like, Like, you're out of your mind. What are you doing? You're out of your mind. You're giving up your life. You're giving up your family. Alvin, you got a son, you got a child on the way. You're giving up everything. What is? So they were feeding us all this crap until finally we just said, fuck and shut up. We don't want to hear it. It's time to stop the game. And you're going to take orders from us at this point. There is no longer a captain on this vessel. And that's how we made it work. We chartered a course to Cambodia. We were going to initially go to Thailand on the down on the peninsula side, across the Gulf of Siam. There's places there on that peninsula where it's only 8 miles across till you get into Burma. At that time, it was Burma. And so we thought that if we could run the ship aground there and get over to Burma, at least we would be in a place that might have some safety for us. And it only took 2 of us to run the ship aground, one on the helm and one in the engine room to make sure the prop is turning. And so we had the 2 people there. It was me and him. All we had to do was put the officers over the side of the vessel, and then we could blow up the vessel on the beach. At which point we had been discussing what was going on in Cambodia. That Sihanouk was out of the country, but we knew that they were neutral and that they might actually provide us some safety. So we were on radio silence. We kept radio silence for, I believe, 2 days. And then once we broke the radio silence, as we were traveling, we were getting closer and closer to Cambodia. And all of a sudden, the radar starts pulling up vessels that were coming towards us from in the Gulf of Siam. They were heading towards us. And it was just the 2 of us with guns, and we had a skeleton crew. And we didn't know if the government would drop SEALs, Navy SEALs, over and try to capture us. We broke radio silence, sent radio messages out to get these other vessels to back away. They had planes circling us. I walked out on deck with my pistol, and I mean, I could see the pilot, and I was very close to firing rounds at him, not to bring him down, but to get him to back away from the vessel. And I'm pretty confident I would have hit the plane. So that was the initial thing that occurred. And when we broke radio silence, people wanted to know, the government and others wanted to know what was happening. And what were our demands? What kind of demands? Well, let's put this back into the context of what was going on in 1970 in the United States. You went into any post office and you saw wanted posters, and some of the top most wanted people were weathermen, former SDSers, but weathermen. And
sorry, could you just explain what an SDSer is for those who don't know?
Students for a Democratic Society.
All right.
They would hold teach-ins and be-ins, and myself, and McKay on the West Coast, McKay was doing it on the East Coast. I was attending teach-ins and things, learning about what to do if I was going to get drafted, how to avoid it, and or whatever, and maybe go to Canada, whatever. I had already been to Vietnam, and I didn't want to go back. There's a whole lot of story there just in that issues of what occurred. And the weathermen and the SDS broke up. They split, and the radical group was the weathermen, and of course they went underground after a bomb exploded at the townhouses in New York. The townhouse explosion.
Maybe we can pull it back now to where you are, because it's very interesting to me that you weren't tailed more closely, because you might have had radio silence, but you would have been picked up on the radar of other ships in the area, so they would have known where you were.
Absolutely.
But you still, was your vessel faster, or did you just have too much initiative for everyone else?
It just, everybody was told to stay away a distance because we were going to blow the ship up if they came close.
Right. Okay.
And that's what we told them, and we were prepared to do that. We expected not to live. We expected to die on that vessel.
Did you think at any point that you might just get blown out of the water?
Yes, absolutely. And so that's part of the reason. Part of the reason we told them that there was nobody was allowed within a certain distance of us. But when a ship like of that kind of explosive power goes, it's going to cause problems if you're anywhere nearby. So so everybody wants to be away for safety's sake. And so if it blows up, Pippa, there's no place to go. There's no place.
And it would be a kind of mission accomplished anyway for you.
Yes. And so so at that point, the radio operator let them know who it was that had taken the vessel. Our demand was, we requested political asylum in Cambodia. Message was passed on to the Cambodian authorities and beyond. And surprisingly, Prince Norodom Sihanouk gave us asylum. And the third demand was, or the third request was that they seize the vessel when we bring it in, and that they hold the vessel for the duration of the Indo-Chinese War, Southeast Asian War, the Vietnam War, so that none of the weapons would be used. And they agreed. Sihanouk agreed. Even though he wasn't in the country, he was in Russia, and then he was coming back as quickly as possible because this was in his country. And he stopped in, he went to China to talk to the Chinese and government about whatever. I think they were looking for material aid because of and trying to get the Chinese and others to put pressure on the Vietnam so that they weren't using the Ho Chi Minh Trail to come into the South. I'm speculating on that, but that's what I suspect was going on. I think that was in the reports at the time in the newspapers or on the news. I had a shortwave radio that I listened to on a regular basis. And so we were given political asylum if we brought the ship there. So I went into the chart room, pointed to Kampong Som, which was the nearest Cambodian port. And the mate on duty and myself sat there and charted a course. And he said, "Oh, we're not going to make it. The water's too shallow." And so we had the engine room start releasing ballast so that the ship would be higher. And we pulled into Kampong, out in the water just off of, within the territorial water of Cambodia. The US couldn't go there. It was a neutral country. Once we went into that territorial water, we were safe. At least we thought so. And
can I ask what was the position of those who were still on board at that stage? Did they just disembark and fade away?
I beg your pardon, I cut you off. Say that again.
Those who were still remaining on board at that time, who weren't part of the two-man mutiny, did they just disembark at the time and fade away, or did they stay on the boat, ship? Tell me, their fate, as it were, to explain that they weren't part of the mutiny, for example. Were they in evidence at all after that event, or did they just melt away?
They were afraid that we were going to harm one of them. And so people tried their best to stay away from us on board the vessel. There was some looting going on, and I had told them that they couldn't go into other people's lockers and take stuff. I said, that's got to stop. And there was it was a ship of thieves. And yeah, I mean, I stole the ship, but we were sailors, and they stayed away from us as far as possible. When food was brought, when we ordered food from the galley and it was brought to us, they had to eat it before we would eat it. We took precautions. But in any case, when we arrived in Cambodia, the Cambodian authorities came out to see us. We surrendered our guns. And then they told us, they later gave our gun, the captain went on board their vessel and explained his position. We explained ours. And they handed us our guns back. And told us that you're going to be staying on the vessel for at least a day, and then we will bring you in the next day. And so we got our guns back, and the captain and the chief mate and a lot of the people that stayed on the ship were just upset with the government of the Cambodian government. You can't give them their guns back. Oh, yes, we do. And when I was in the bridge, and when we seized the vessel, there's another gun on the ship, and that's the captain's gun. Well, I captured that. I had the captain open the safe, and I took that gun and all the ammunition with it. So now I had two pistols, plus McKay had his. Yeah, we were loaded down for. We were prepared to die on that. It was a surprise that it didn't happen. Or
So
spend the rest of
you're still on the ship, you're moored in Thailand. The mission, in a sense, has been accomplished. You have stopped the napalm being delivered to where it would be used on people in Vietnam. And so your mission essentially, did you feel a sense of achievement at that stage, or were you still too much in hot water?
Cambodia had close ties with Russia and China, primarily Russia, and Cuba. The Cuban embassy was really strong there as well. It felt that it was accomplished when the ship was seized by the Cambodian government and brought in closer to the port and dropped anchor. Once the anchor was dropped, and and then they sent another vessel out, and we went back with that vessel along with the captain. And we were at that point with the commander of the Cambodian Navy. He was the head commander for the entire government and the Navy, and so he, their chief of staff. So anyway, he also was a pilot. We go to the airport, and as soon as we got to the airport, and I saw MiG fighters, I just realized that's when I felt that we were going to survive all of this. Prior to that, prior to us arriving at that airport, which at that time I think it was called Sihanoukville. When we were taken to Sihanoukville and put on board a plane, a government plane, and flown to Phnom Penh, we started breathing much better. And the captain was with us, and he actually told us that he understood why we were doing this and that he doesn't agree with it, but he understood it. And he commended us for not killing anyone. And in particular, there was a couple incidences where one of the crazy guys on board the ship, well, he wasn't crazy, but he thought that he could distract us enough that someone could attack us. And he attempted to do so. And I came very close to shooting him. And McKay got between me and him. And stopped. I would have shot McKay because I couldn't have shot the guy without shooting McKay. And so I stopped. But I was on the verge of hurting someone really bad. And which was not what I wanted to do. It's not in my nature. As with most people, you can, when you're pushed to the limit, you will do what you have to survive. And so McKay and I ended up in Phnom Penh. In Phnom Penh, we were there and taken to what had been a base, a training facility for their paratroopers and other people, and along the river, not too far from the river. And I mean, we were right next to the river. And then that night, the coup began, the so-called bloodless coup.
This was the US controlled coup. Now, do you think the timing of that had anything to do with your own actions, or was it just a coincidence?
No, ma'am. I have a feeling that the Long Nol, who was the top general in the government, in their army, he and his conspirators, I believe that they seized the moment because Sihanouk was out of the country, but they were getting ready to bring him back into the country. He was leaving China to come back, and but he had been on a peace mission going around trying to get people to stop the Vietnamese from using his country to go through to get to the south, and the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and so he was on his way back to return, and the U.S. government obviously was feeding Long Nol and others all along, for a long time, and the CIA. And what occurred was when the mutiny happened and the head of the state was out of the country, it just set up the perfect time for them to come in and just say, okay, we're going to do this. And they did it. And they seized the parliament or their government. And a lot of them were very close allies with Sihanouk that were arrested, and they were sent away. They were taken away. Their houses were broke into, and lots of different things occurred. And then on the streets, the so-called bloodless coup was not bloodless. In the base that we were at, it was a duplex. We were in a duplex building. So on half of the building was us. The other half of the building were interrogators. And all along the front of the building were people that were being interrogated with their hands tied and with wire, bound with wire and stuff. Pretty well beat up. A lot of them were beat up, and a lot of them had been shot and we were wounded. But they were still being interrogated. We weren't supposed to stay in our room. We weren't supposed to come out, but we did. And I took cigarettes out, and we lit cigarettes and held them for the people to smoke. We gave them water. We gave them opportunity to, to some humanity, but we weren't allowed to touch them. We weren't even supposed to be out of our room. The guards didn't know what to do with us. They're not going to kill two Americans. They just didn't have the authority. And, and so here we are assisting these people. And the next day, they were being interrogated in the building, right in the same building, but on the other side. And the next, during the night, I would get up and ask, well, the line got smaller and smaller. Where are these people? And one of the guards pointed to the dock. There was a pier that went out into the Mekong River. We were at the confluence of the Mekong and the Tonle Sap. And that's the confluence of the two rivers. And right outside of Phnom Penh. And they pointed to it, and Clyde spoke a little bit of French and was able to get the interpretation. What was going on was they had been thrown into the water. And so they're bound.
Yeah, hands tied. They were
Taken out to the
going to drown.
Right into the water. And so we witnessed that. We saw the vehicles coming in with blood all over them, and windows shot out on the cars, and the sides of the cars shot out, and then people being thrown onto the ground, and then waiting for the interrogation. They didn't have anywhere else to put us. They put us in that building before the coup. And then the coup happens, and it hit the US press and everywhere else in the world. It was a bloodless coup. No, it was not bloodless. And it was very violent. I understood that the Cubans had just, they gathered up their shortwave radio, and they just hit the bush and disappeared. That's what we were told. The Vietnamese embassy, they had closed it down and rounded those people up and sent them away. But they diplomatically did it. So it was interesting how the different governments dealt with this coup over the next couple of days. The Russians had hospitals there, so that the Cubans worked in. There was lots of things where all of a sudden the Russians are being sent home. It was an interesting situation to witness and observe at the time.
So what happened to you? I mean, you were in this room that you obviously weren't locked in. There was some degree of trust that you wouldn't leave it, although you did.
We did. We just walked outside and smoked cigarettes, and we would tell them we're just smoking a cigarette. Then we'd go down the lines and give these guys.
Oh, bless you. Oh, God, how awful. How absolutely awful. But then something happened to you and to Clyde, because the coup changed your status in the country.
Well, they had to, Pippa, they had to honor what the agreement was from before, and they said they would. They wanted to represent themselves as still being neutral, this new government. And the U.S., and they played along with it. U.S. kept demanding the vessel to be returned, and they didn't do it. It's still there at that time. And then we were then, because of what we were seeing occur and witnessing, we were then seized and taken to a prison vessel that was on the Mekong River, just a little bit further down at another camp. And at that camp, we were placed on the vessel. Surprisingly enough, we were put into one fairly large room, and the doors were locked and unlocked periodically. So we could walk and exercise on the vessel. But on the vessel was also Prince Sihanouk's brother and brother-in-law and other people. There were other people on the vessel that had been in the government that were arrested and taken to this vessel. That's where they were kept. And I went and see, I don't think we saw a single woman. I believe it was all men, and the women were somewhere else. But their families were broke up, and this is where the ministers and officers of government were kept. We were in the same prison vessel.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
um, and interestingly enough, down below decks, it was an ammunition the storehouse. It was an ammunition storehouse. There was also showers down there, and that's where we had to go to use the bathroom or to shower. We had to go to escort from the guards to do such, and they did as well. Uh, so, and the guards lived on that next deck down, and so we were there, kept there until Clyde escaped almost. We actually were sent to another place to stay for a while. We were moved from place to place from time to time.
So how long were you in this relative captivity situation?
From the fourth day of being arrested, being in Cambodia. From
Yeah.
that,
For how long after that?
well, I want to say that it was the mutiny was March 14th, and so I think I returned to the United States in December.
Okay. Okay.
And as any blowhard sailor in particular, we made the statement that we wouldn't come back without a gun. We wouldn't come back to the United States. We weren't interested in returning to the United States. We had asked for political asylum in Sweden, and the Russians had offered to fly us in, to take us out of the country. But we had stupidly returned our passports to the US government and said that we were renouncing our citizenship. We didn't want anything to do with the US government any longer. And so we were then trying to get out of the country. Sweden apparently agreed to take us. Russia agreed to fly us, but we had to have that passport, and they wouldn't take us without a passport. And we had surrendered the passports.
So
like I
then
said,
what? Then what?
then we were stuck, and the government didn't know what to do with us because they wanted to pretend that they were neutral and that they were fighting the Khmer Rouge and the Vietnam Army that was using their country to go through, but they would point to us and say, okay, well, we're still neutral. There they are. They're here. We gave them political asylum. They still have asylum, even though they're under house arrest. They're safe.
So, but then something changed, and you ended up with Clyde escaped. Did you? At what point did Clyde escape this situation?
We had gone to a restaurant. My mental health, I was starting to deteriorate from sensory deprivation from being in solitary for a while, and that, and also the fact that things were crumbling and it wasn't going quite the way. I was too young and I wasn't prepared for all those changes. McKay was a little bit further along advanced because he had already been to prison before and had ideas of what was going to happen. My family all cut me loose. His families continued to support him, and he would get letters from home. Only letters I got from home was one. It was from my ex-wife, was crying about, what did you do? You're not a communist. You're not a red. You're not. You don't know anything about Marxism. You don't. This is stupid what you did. You give up your life with your son. All this other crap. You're guilt tripping me. And I'm sure that she was prepped on it by her parents and the feds. So anyway, eventually I had this, I wanted, for want of a better word, I would say sensory deprivation to the point of having a nervous breakdown. And I had to come out of that. And I knew that it was getting bad. I knew it was going to get worse. And we had been interviewed by somebody with some newspaper, and I told him, he said, "Is there anything we can get you? Is there anything I can help you with?" And I said, "Thorazine. If you can find some Thorazine, I would like some Thorazine." And I said, "I need it to help my head." And lo and behold, the next time we saw him, he had a little bag of Thorazine, and he hands me the bag and says, here, I was able to get this at the local pharmacy. They have it right here in the pharmacy. And so I had about 200 tabs or thereabouts of Thorazine, and I self-medicated so that I was able to function better. And McKay and I were still hoping to escape. I had a digital camera, not a digital, I had cameras, 2 cameras. I had my shortwave radio. McKay didn't have a camera, but we both had a nice set of clothes, and we had the sensibility that if the opportunity would arise that we were going to try to escape, whether it was singularly or together, and at which point I told McKay that it was best if he went singularly, that I would assist and do whatever I could to help him. But I wasn't sufficiently cured enough or healed enough to be able to be of any value other than assist him to escape. So we came up with an idea together that he was going to mimic a newspaper reporter, have the 2 cameras, the radio, and a pack, and everything. But it was just all to make him look like a reporter. And we went out to dinner. They took us out to dinner because they didn't feed us at that place when we were at where he escaped from. And they had taken us out to dinner. And during that time, we did that little game where somebody had to go pee, and we only had 4 guards, and 2 of them were outside the door, and there were 2 inside the building. And one guy would go, and then the other guy said, I got to go too. And the guards were supposed to go into the room, but they weren't supposed to leave the room. But they had to also follow us into the bathroom. And when the second person said they had to go to the bathroom, and there's only 4 guards, we got split and McKay out the window and gone. And I never forget, I came back into the room and sat down to eat my dinner, and they come in, they were all upset and curious, and there was all of this rushing around, and they one of the guards came over and stuck a gun right in my face and said, where is he? And what did you do? And I told him, what do you mean? Where's who? He's in the bathroom. And he escaped. He and Larry Humphreys escaped.
As a little side note to your story, could you just tell us what happened to him very briefly? Because it wasn't so good.
The goal was to connect up with the Khmer Rouge, and thinking that would be helpful and we could get up to the Vietnam and from Vietnam to Sweden. That was our focus and goal. And McKay escaped, did hook up with the Khmer Rouge. They made him a porter. They didn't trust him, and they made him a porter, so he had to carry a machine gun, he had to carry ammunition, and he didn't like it. And the same thing with Humphrey, they both had to do it, and they decided to not do it and go on a food strike. And during that time of that strike, in this little village in Parrots Beak, the U.S. had invaded Parrots Beak, which is a province that looks like a parrot's beak off the eastern side of Cambodia in the southeast. And they ended up shooting him. They took him out to where a bomb had hit the ground and blew a hole. And apparently, we had been told that they had been smashed with a shovel, the shovels that they used to dig their own graves. And but I've also heard that they were shot because the people in the village said that they heard the shots. My suspicion is that they were hit with the shovels and then shot when they were laying on the ground. And that's my suspicion. It's they didn't want to waste the bullets.
Huh. So how did you actually get to hear about that in the end?
Um, Two men, one a former seaman and one who I'd met when I came out of prison, Richard Lynette and Roberto Loiterman. Roberto had been a merchant sailor, the same as myself. Um, Richard had gone off to Richard was very close to me and my family. He knew my wife and my new wife, and we had developed a relationship over the years. And I told him the story, and he was just in love with the story. He had gone on to Hollywood to try to become a writer, and also to try to sell this story. I didn't know that that was the case at the time, but I found out later. And they had written a book, and in the research for the book, they had gone back to Parrots Beak and traced the route that McKay had gone on, and they were able to find the village where he was executed, and apparently there was a rewards for anybody that could come in with parts of people's bodies that were Americans, from planes that had been shot down, helicopters and jets and whatnot, and MIAs. And someone had recovered something and tried to sell it. And apparently it ended up back in Hawaii, where they try to identify through DNA who the body is. And Richard Richard Lynette and Roberto were able to convince the government to test this remains, and the remains were positive for McKay.
Right, I get that. Now I know that it's a very difficult story, all of this for you to tell. I completely understand. I'm very grateful that you're sharing it. But of course, you ended up in a US jail. So perhaps you can just briefly tell us the events that led you to that position.
Things were getting worse and worse around Phnom Penh. The Khmer Rouge were surrounding it, and they had captured this town and that town and this town. And so they were encircling and now rocketing Phnom Penh. And I would get the information from reporters from time to time. And I still had my shortwave. No, I didn't have my shortwave radio. I'd lost it. I gave it to McKay. But I was getting reports, and that the circle was closing. And the guards that spoke English were extremely friendly to me. Sihanouk was famous for giving out gold medallion with a Buddha on one side and his picture on the other, and they were made out of gold, and they were gifts to the people. And when the coup occurred, everybody took them and flipped them around. So you had the Buddha, but you weren't looking at Sihanouk. Sihanouk. And so when I was being held, the guards sometimes would turn it around and show me the picture of Sihanouk and point to it. Sihanouk is good, Long Nol is bad. So the military was still divided. And the loyalty of the people for Sihanouk was incredible, really immense. And I had two guards that were pro-Sihanouk. And a reporter had come and said that he told me how you could hear the rocketing going on occasionally, And so he said, what are you going to do? You're going to stay here and get captured by the Khmer Rouge, or get killed in this fighting that's going to occur right here? And he says, I can help you out if you're interested. So he and I discussed the possibility of him coming to the place where I was being held, and me stepping through a gate and being whisked away in a car immediately, a taxi. So he shows up, and the taxi's there exactly like he had promised. And I was then ran to the taxi, escaped my guards, they didn't shoot or nothing. They were loyal to Sinu. And I got into the taxi, and the way we went. And I had him take me to the U.S. Embassy, and I surrendered myself at the U.S. Embassy. In fact,
Right.
that's the photograph of me with a bald head, because I had shaved my head in the prison because I didn't want to get lice or other insects up in my head. And
so you were then arrested on arrival. What exactly happened when you got back to the US?
Interesting enough, the first place we stopped was Hawaii. The federal marshals were on and others were on the plane. In the back of the plane was a coffin with a flag, and I was told it was some senator's son or something like that. I had asked the guards, why is there only one coffin on this plane? And they made a comment that it was some officer's son, not a senator's son, but an officer's son. And it was being returned because of the plane coming back to Hawaii. And the feds came up to me. I still had maybe 50 to 100 tabs of Thorazine. And they said, you're going to get arrested for that. You need to get rid of it. And I suggest that you take it over to the toilet and dump it before the authorities come on the plane. And they were the authorities, but they told me you need to get rid of that so that you're not getting an additional charges. Anyway, the U.S. government wanted the maximum sentencing or whatever. And a lot of the other people that were involved, including the captain, there were people that were demanding the death penalty for me, and that I be tried for treason. But it's an interesting situation when you're a merchant sailor. First of all, you're not in the military, so you didn't break a military law, you broke a civilian law. Well, what was the law? The law was the mutiny on the high seas. Could they try me for treason? Absolutely not. I mean, what did I do? It was a mutiny. I pulled the gun on the officers. We mutinied on the ship. We were not combatants in their war. We were on the other side. I think one of the hardest things to deal with was the North Vietnamese at the time of the mutiny. Suspicion was aroused by the Russians and the North Vietnamese that we were part of the CIA, and that's what we did. We brought in the armaments for the coup. That was not the case at all. But the US left picked up on that. And we were basically abandoned by nobody on the left thought anything of us. We were just two crazies. US government pushed that thing, and the US left, for the most part, propagated it as well. The interesting part of it is there was no basis for it. And we have never lied or denied what we were doing and what we did. McKay went to his death still resisting war. not wanting to carry weapons. When we got back, and when I got back, I used the royal we. When I got back, I always think of it as a mutual thing. It was the two of us were that close. We developed, we relied on each other to not die and to complete our task that we had set for ourselves. And the focus was to try to keep alive but still do what was the right thing. And morally and if you believe in it philosophically or morally or religiously, it was the right thing to do for us. So when I got back, the feds, someone said that I had tried to commit suicide. There's no cuts on my wrist except from surgeries and stuff. But they said that I was trying to cut myself and kill myself. So they put me under a suicide watch. And so immediately when the plane left Hawaii, we ended up in Travis Air Force Base in California. It was snowing outside. I was wearing a lightweight not like t-shirt, but a button-down shirt, lightweight, very summery from from Cambodia. So I went from the tropics to snow in one day, and got there at night, and I was immediately arrested by the military police and taken into military custody, put into a cell in their the compound that they had. And so I was placed into this cell and by myself, and they posted a guard outside the cell, armed guard, and he spit on me, and called me all kinds of names and shit. And then another guard came in and did the same. And so they had 2 or 3 of these guards coming in and spitting at me and cussing at me and calling me a traitor and all this other shit. And I just got as far back as I could because I didn't want to get spit on. And then an officer came in and just asked me if there was anything that I needed. And I said, yes. I said, if you could have these assholes quit spitting on me, that would be good. And that would be a start. And I would like some water. And anyway, long story of it, the long and short of it is that they were ordered to stop spitting on me, that there had to be 2 of them there. And if one of them spit on me, they were both going to be punished for it. And so, I mean, right in front of me, he made that decision and said it. And then from there, I went to Los Angeles. I was put onto what's called death row, maximum security, in Los Angeles County Jail. There's a section of the jail's house where prisoners that had been sentenced to death and were back down for appeals, they were kept in a particular cell block. And high power, maximum security, death row. The death row people were upstairs on the 2nd tier. On the 1st tier, we were all maximum security, high power people. The Manson family were there. Just to give you an example, Elmer Pratt, that's his slave name. His nom de guerre was Geronimo. He was the Minister of Defense for the Black Panther Party. He was there. So we were on that lower level. Nobody was placed on either side of me. I had an empty cell block on either side. Geronimo was, I believe he was done the same way. And so was, well, they took Charlie Manson out when I came in, and they put him in a different place. But 2 cells over was 2 different members of the Manson family. So anyway, that's where I was kept for a while until I went to trial. When I was taken to trial, I wore a belly chain, ankle chained, and my arms were shackled together to my belly chain. And it was pulled, so I had to hunch over and walk in. When I was transported, they took the wrist chains off, and then they put my arms like this and chained me to 2 other prisoners. So I was in the middle. They used them as bait in case I was going to be shot. The government was, the police were concerned that I would be shot and not be able to stand trial. And so they used these two prisoners as a human shield, in essence. I told the prisoners, they said they couldn't figure out why they were being transported like that. And I explained to them, well, it's not about you. It's like they're trying to kill me. They're afraid that I'm going to be shot, and they're hoping that you will get hit first. That they weren't happy with that, and they there was a lot of shouting and shit going on around that crap. My first appearance in court, that was where I first met my comrades, some of my comrades in VVAW, Vietnam Veterans Against the War. There were 3 of the members of the local chapter outside of Los Angeles was there at my hearing. I can name them off. I remember them. I was shackled, but I tried to give them a fist up, and they did the same. And I was taken in and to meet my court-appointed lawyers until some leftist lawyers were volunteered to take over. One, a former member of the Communist, or a member of the Communist Party, and another one, Socialist Labor Party, or Socialist Workers. I don't remember which it was, but they became my lawyer team. And so they were able to approach the government. There were people demanding the death penalty for me. They wanted to execute me. They were able to negotiate and pull together an offer that I agreed to for a 10-year sentence for mutiny on the high seas, and a sentence for armed for having a gun, using a gun in the process. So I had 2 different charges that I had pled guilty to for them to drop all the others. There was 20, 30 charges, I don't remember, 25 charges, which were dropped if I just pled guilty to these 2 and it wasn't a public trial. And which was a big mistake on my part in one sense, but on the other sense, it allowed me to be sentenced by a lenient judge that sentenced me to a minimum of 6 months and a maximum of 8 years. I was sentenced under what's called the FYCA, Federal Youth Corrections Act. And the maximum that I could be held was 8 years, and then they had to release me for 2 years of parole. But the minimum was 6 months. I maxed out my sentence. During that time in prison, I spent a year in solitary for attempted escape. And mixed with the population very well, became one of the organizers for work strikes and things, and was able to help assist others. I wasn't doing this alone. There was a group of us, all of us leftists, at least one weatherman, a couple of members of the BLA, Black Liberation Army. It was, and AIM was there as well. But we pulled together, and we were able to lift up our standard of living in the prison for all of the people, not just us, but for all of the people in the prison. And there's coincidentally, they changed a law. The interesting thing is when leftists back then were arrested, they classified us as special offenders. A special offender is also a organized criminal. So we were basically being tried and treated as organized crime. So leftists that were in prison then could be classified as special offender status. And if you were given that status, you didn't want that status. It wasn't, you got treated differently. And by differently, I mean, there were times when I got the shit beat out of me by the guards. They wouldn't have done that to a regular prisoner that was in there for pot. But special offender status, you spend a lot of time locked up. I was in a solid, I always had my own cell. I didn't have to share a cell with anyone. It wasn't a question of having to. Because I was a special offender status, I was kept solitary a lot.
That must have been really hard, and I appreciate you telling us about this. It would be hard to go through that all again in the current climate, wouldn't it?
It would be, because today you would be considered a terrorist with the new laws that we've passed. You would be no different than Al Qaeda. You would be no different than a Palestinian fighting for their civil rights. It's the status today in today's world. I don't think that the world has changed so much that the breakup of the left because of COINTELPRO and the executions of so many leftists and during the radical 60s and 70s. I mean, look at what they did in Philadelphia, where they bombed the MOVE, the MOVE folks. So what they did in Jackson State, and I mean, it's just, we started shooting ourselves. They started shooting us. And when that happened, the left fractionalized, but it all occurred because of the leftists that were also arming themselves and preparing for what we thought was going to be the time of change. And it was a change, but it wasn't what we were hoping for, I guess. And but so the world has changed radically, and the way that we look at prisoners now has changed radically as well. It's far more right wing. In my opinion, we're a fascist state. I don't think we're an oligarchy. I don't think that we are. I think that it's a fascist state. We don't really have two parties to vote for. They're the same. One's the left wing and one's the right wing of that same old fucking war word. That's what they are. So,
the uni party, absolutely. And I know that you would say that all war is bad, except maybe class war. And I was wondering,
it's essential. We have to prepare, we have to struggle, we have to educate people. And it stopped for a long time in the 60s when there was Peace, Love, Woodstock. That's not that they were bad. Peace, Love, Woodstock people were wonderful, but we changed. And a lot of the left became very fractionalized. And now it shows, because we still don't have the massive unity that we should have. I mean, I recognize what UNAC. It's been. I look at what you guys do, and I see what you're. You pulled together a coalition, and it's unifying. But still, we have all of these fractionalized groups out there that want to take the lead. But the reality is, we don't really know how the class struggle will occur in this country. It's still hidden behind so many smokes and mirrors, so much smoke and so many mirrors.
The propaganda machine is very well honed now.
It is.
And, you listen to the mainstream news, you think, well, maybe I should just think the opposite now. It's become a projectionist viewpoint that the mainstream media are echoing or just doing the bidding of whatever the ruling party is trying to put over, and repeating it ad infinitum. And so we have the left split on matters of Ukraine, on matters of war and peace worldwide. It's difficult to find unity. And, those of us who've been doing it for a long time are holding the line. and so we're still going to be here. But
Yes,
a lot of other people really have to start reading between the lines and getting to the nub of these matters. And I think no more so than in this current situation with Ukraine, where we are not being told the truth. We're being told anything but the truth, which is making it harder and harder to disentangle the money, the weapons, the politics. It's very hard to find clarity unless you have a lot of time in your hands and you're prepared to search for it very thoroughly and
exactly.
triangulate the knowledge you have. And most people don't have that time. They're caught in the debt trap. They're wage slaves. They're trying to do the best for their children. They simply cannot spare the time, the resource to go into this in any depth. And it's a sad moment, but here we are, the end
You
of
know,
our interview now.
You're
And I
absolutely correct. I mean, what you've just said in a nutshell is correct. The class struggle is such, they're trying just to survive. And
yeah,
you have to have
yeah,
some freedom to be able to do all of the above that we were just saying. And you're totally correct. You're totally correct.
thank you. Well, we're coming to the end now. So, I mean, is there any last things that you would like to say, something we might have missed out, or something really you would like to say for the future, for the movement, to how to solidify ourselves anew?
Well, you started this conversation off about that the story needs to be told. And it really does, because they hide all of our history. Our working class history is hidden. And we're not taught that. For many years, I backed out of the movement, but I ran a Marxist study group in Washington, D.C. I used to travel to it. I helped organize people to get together to go out for demonstrations. But for years, I backed out because my comrades told me, Al, you've done what nobody else has done. And you just need to back out and live a life a bit. And so I tried. And but with climate change occurring as radically as fast as it's happening, and of course the military is the biggest polluter in the world. When we look at all of this stuff, there's no time to stop.
Mm,
You need to be at this edge. You need to be in the forefront. And will some of us fall? The odds are yes. Be prepared for it. And whatever that preparation takes, that's up to you. But the reality is this is going to occur historically regardless. You and I can die tomorrow. And we know that there are people that are stepping up to take those same positions that we left with. And that's the beauty of being in the left. We know that this government will change. We know that this will fail and fall. And the question is do we know how we're going to replace it, how we're going to shape it? And that's something I've been giving a lot of thought to lately, and hoping for the best, because by teaching people, it all goes back to educating. That's where it goes to, Pippa.
It does indeed. It does indeed. And unfortunately, an education is something very few get these days. They get schooled, but they don't get an education.
Correct.
I think, yeah. So I think we can leave it there. Thank you so much, Al. Your input has been just amazing. Your story of courage and heroism on the shoulders of just two men is extraordinary. And it's a part of a history that we need to uncover, because these events empower others to take action and to think differently. So thank you so much, Al Glatowski, for being with us today. And when this video goes out, I'm sure thousands of people, maybe more, will be looking at it with intense interest. So thank you so much. My name's Pippa Bartolotti. I'm interviewing on behalf of UNAC, United National Anti-War Coalition in the United States. And Al, I believe you wanted to say one last thing.
One last thing. People will write what they want about you. You don't have the control of that. They will write what they want about you. I have never read any book or anything that's been produced about me or any stories. I've looked at them and just turned a page or two and just say, okay, that's it, put it away. Because you, Pippa, know me. Joe knows me. You know where my heart is. You know where my loyalties lay. And I appreciate it. And I spoke to 3, 4, 5 different comrades before this interview to even see, do you think I should do it? Fuck, Al, you need to do it. Because if you don't do it, it ain't going to get done.
Exactly.
Pippa, thank you so much. And my thanks to UNAC and good health.
Good health to you. Long life and good health.
Peace out.
Signing out now.
Peace out. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Peace.
Gather round, I'll tell a story about a man I know and what he did across the ocean half a century ago. Death was raining from the skies all over Vietnam. Al and Clyde decided they had to try to stop the bombs. These 2 young men signed up to join the merchant marine, horrified by what they heard along with what they'd seen. They began to have discussions. They found a common goal. They'd join the crew of the Columbia Eagle, and then they'd take control. The ship was full of napalm, heading across the sea to be loaded onto planes and be dropped upon the country to burn the skin off people beneath it. At the time, they vowed to break the law to prevent a greater crime. They thought they'd spend their lives in prison, or more likely they would die. But Clyde and Al agreed that at least they had to try to sail to Cambodia with all the napalm as well, where it might remain forever, the bombs that never fell. Carried out their plan, and they didn't slip. Just 2 guns between them, but soon they ran the ship. They brought it into the harbor by the city of Phnom Penh to stay in neutral waters until there was peace again. But that's not how it ended. The next thing that they knew, Sihanouk was overthrown. There was a military coup. Clyde McKay died in the jungle, and with so many of his peers in a California prison, Al Glatowski spent 8 years. The ship was not off course by much more than a bit. The future of the Folly, perhaps they didn't change it. But while the blood was flowing, and most people spent their days maybe marching in the streets or just joining the rat race, there are those among us who can say they really tried, who did everything they possibly could to stop the fratricide. So if you see a big white beard on the Central Eastern shore, he might be a mutineer who tried to stop the war. Gather round, I'll tell a story about a man I know, what he did across the ocean half a century ago.